that's where we are today. So here is take 2. Today we will be talking about the murder of Brad Perry. Now in 1984, Brad Perry was your typical college student living in Brigham City, Utah. This is an extremely small town. He's 21 years old. He's attending Utah State University, and he is engaged to be married. So when his mother and his brother decide they're gonna go to California over a Memorial weekend, he chooses to stay home so he can pick up some extra shifts at the gas station he works at. So it's Memorial Weekend of 1984. And there are these 2 college students who are cramming for finals. They stay up almost the entire night studying, and then around 4 a.m. they decide to take a break and go get like some snacks and drinks. So they head off to the gas station, the same gas station that Brad Perry is working at. This is not a gas station where an attendant typically comes out and like pumps your gas for you. But on this particular morning, this was exactly what happened. The students pull in to the gas station and an attendant walks out, and he asks them what they want. So the driver says he needs $5 in gas, and his friend wants a pack of cigarettes. So the driver gives him $5 for the gas, and the student who wanted the cigarettes hands over a $5 bill for the cigarettes. When the attendant comes out, he hands the student his cigarettes and tells him that his change is $4. Now this is kind of weird because even back in the 80s, cigarettes were not exactly $1. As the student goes to take the 4 $1 bills back from the attendant, that is his change, he notices blood on the man's hands and on his shoes. So these 2 students kind of just stare at each other, and they know something bad is happening. So they get in their car trying to act as normal as possible, and they leave, and they drive to the nearest payphone and call 911. 5 minutes after these boys had left the station, officers arrive at the gas station, and they find blood in the front of the gas station, and then bloody footprints leading to a back room. They follow these footprints into the back room, where they find a body, a deceased body. He was laying in a pool of blood, and his hands were tied behind his back with wire. The victim had been stabbed in the chest with a screwdriver that had penetrated his chest cavity. There was also this big cast iron bell nearby that weighed about 40 pounds, and it was covered in blood. And due to the crush wounds on the victim's skull, they believed he had been hit with this bell. So police find a wallet in the victim's back pocket, and they take it out, and there is a driver's license belonging to Brad Perry. Now, Brigham City is such a small town that the officers not only already know Brad Perry, they know his entire family. So the two students who had originally alerted police were taken in and questioned, and once they gave their statements, they sat down with a police sketch artist to try to come up with a sketch of the suspect. Now, one of these students was getting kind of frustrated with the sketch artist because he wasn't capturing the features the way that he thought he should. And apparently this student was a great artist, so he ends up taking the pad of paper and sketching out his own picture of the suspect. Both of these students' stories were very consistent, and both of them described the suspect. One thing that stuck out to police was how they described his eyes. They talked about them being very dark and empty looking. So investigators set out trying to get as much information about Brad as they can. They were interested in his job and his duties at the gas station, and pretty soon they determined that it's very likely that another employee at the gas station was somehow involved, because the safe at the gas station had been accessed, and Brad wouldn't have had access. He wouldn't have even known how to get into this floor safe. Only the assistant manager had access to it, and the assistant manager's name was Thomas Nager. And very suspiciously, he had failed to show up for his 6 a.m. shift that morning. Police had secured the crime scene, so it had been completely taped off. The owner of the gas station was there talking to police, and then someone spots Thomas outside, kind of just gathered with all of the onlookers behind the police tape. This guy was supposed to show up for work at 6 a.m. and didn't, and now he's just kind of like hanging in the back of the crowd watching what's going on. So police were very suspicious of this. Investigators described him as looking incredibly nervous and scared. It didn't take them very long to realize that Thomas Nager looked very much like the police sketch that the students had just finished compiling. So they take him in for questioning, and the first question they ask is, "Why didn't you show up to work, Thomas?" He claims that Brad was actually supposed to call him and wake him up, and then he would come in and relieve Brad. But that call never came, and so he had slept in. At this point, they have his statement, but they don't have much to tie him to the crime, so he is free to go. Investigators end up bringing in this internationally recognized fingerprint expert from West Valley City, Utah, to help with the case. Now, this was before DNA, so fingerprints, that was where it was at when it came to breaking these cases. station, hundreds of fingerprints were gathered, and they began trying to match fingerprints to Thomas Nager's because they are trying to get his fingerprints on maybe this bell or something else to tie him to the murder. But the really weird thing here is they find none of his fingerprints anywhere. And the reason why this is so weird is he works at this gas station. He has worked at this gas station for years. So his fingerprints should be all over the gas station. But they weren't. So police are very suspicious of Thomas. But they have to just keep an eye on him because they have no evidence to tie him to the crime. Crime scene investigators use this forensic vacuum when they're done processing the scene to suck everything up, and it is all kept in storage. So later that same evening that he was killed, another officer driving down Highway 89 notices this man walking southbound who matched the description of the suspect. So he stops him, and this man, we're gonna call Mr. E. So they stop Mr. E, and he had blood on his clothing and on his hands. So police are sure this is their man. So they bring him in, and they also bring in the two students to see if they can get a positive ID on Mr. E. And both students say they are positive that is not the same man. So the Perry family, in the meantime, is having a devastating time trying to deal with the death of Brad. Not only were they trying to come to grips with the fact that he was dead, but his mother and brother had been in SeaWorld when it had happened, so it was even more difficult to process because they just kept thinking if he would have just come with us, he would still be alive. The family had reporters camped out on their lawn for days after Brad was killed, and so they decided to just take off and go to Montana as a family after the funeral to try to get away from it all. The memory of what had happened to Brad was everywhere in this small town. So they go to Montana to kind of get away from the media, get away from it all. And when they come home, their house has been vandalized. It has been broken into. It has been burglarized, vandalized, and someone has even defecated on top of Brad's bed. And the family pretty much right away has their suspicions that the person who broke into their home is their neighbor, Craig Martinez. Craig had a long criminal history and a very bad temper, and he would lose his temper and quickly become extremely violent. So police were able to get a search warrant to look through his home, and they found several items that had been stolen from the Perry home. The murder of Brad had seemed personal to police right from the beginning. They had suspected it was someone living in their small town. has been dealing drugs out of the gas station. So that was why he had been so nervous when talking to police. So after hearing this, coupled with the fact that they knew he had broken into the Perry home, police set their sights on Craig Martinez as a suspect in the murder. In the mid-80s, there was a lot of drug activity in northern Utah, and apparently this gas station was where people were getting all of their drugs in Brigham City and some of the little surrounding towns as well. Police find out that Craig Martinez was somehow involved in this whole drug ring of Thomas Nager's. He was either helping distribute or something. So they begin to come up with kind of their first theory in this case, that Brad Perry had found out about this, and this is his place of employment. He is a very stand-up guy. They believe he had threatened to tell the owner or even call police, and he had been killed so that he couldn't do either of those things. But here's the thing about Brad Perry. He's a big guy. He's 6'1", he's very strong and athletic, and police do not think that one person could have done this. Remember, he was beaten and stabbed. He wasn't shot. So it would have been very hard for one person to get the upper hand on him. So they're thinking maybe Thomas and Craig were both involved in this murder. Craig Martinez's nickname was the Monster because he would lose his temper over the smallest, stupidest things and just become belligerent. So armed with this information, police collect Craig's fingerprints, and they compare these to the fingerprints at the crime scene, but again, they don't have a match. And there really wasn't enough evidence at this point to charge either Thomas or Craig with the murder, so they had to just let both men go. Police really needed some good physical evidence or an eyewitness to this crime to help them solve it, but they didn't have either, and so the case became very, very cold. With each passing year, Brad's family became more and more concerned that this case would never be solved. In May of was incarcerated at the Utah State Prison. So they go to the prison to collect a hair sample from Craig Martinez. And because this guy has such a violent history, the SWAT team has to escort him down to meet with detectives. And when they bring him down, they realize it's going to be hard to get a hair sample from him. This guy has shaved his entire body, head to toe, which is definitely suspicious. And he turns to police and he kind of smirks and he says, "Good luck getting a sample from me." But the prison nurse was there and she's like, "I bet we can find one somewhere." And she ends up getting 2 chest hairs from him as a sample. And so they send that in, and it comes back that it is not a match to this hair. So investigators say while this hair did not match to him, this doesn't mean he wasn't at the murder scene. It just means the hair recovered from the murder scene wasn't his. And if you think about how many people are coming in and out of gas stations every day, like, we probably all have left hair at gas stations before, so this doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't there. This is just not a match. So Amy Hugh, the Box Elder County attorney, happened to be really good friends with the Perry family growing up, and her friend's murder ended up shaping her life as well. She became a lawyer and then ran for county attorney because she wanted to open this case and solve it. She said that Brad used to babysit her when she was younger, and he was always so fun. He was always playing games with them. So she just couldn't let his murder go unsolved. So 18 years after Brad's death, she runs for county attorney. And then she sits down with the detectives assigned to his case, and she asks if all of the DNA that they have has been tested. So, at this time, DNA testing was super new in the state of Utah. It wasn't being used all that much. But Amy was able to help facilitate some additional funds so that they could do DNA testing. The results were sent in, and they came back to show that all of the DNA-related evidence that had been collected at the scene belonged to Brad Perry. So police basically have nothing, and this was extremely frustrating for them. Then, one investigator remembers that they have one other piece of evidence that has never been checked. The dollar bill that the student had gotten with blood on it had been sent to the Utah State Crime Lab, and it had been put in their freezer, so it had never been touched or tested. So they go and try to get this piece of evidence, and even the technician at the crime lab said, "I'm sure this blood just belongs to your victim." But they decide to test it anyway. The detective said, "We know the blood may be Brad's, but we also know that our suspect handled this dollar, so we're hoping we can get some sort of trace DNA system for the DNA found on the dollar. The name that the DNA came back to was a man named Glenn Griffin, and Glenn Griffin had never come up in relation to this case. Like, police, he wasn't even on their radar. Police find out that Glenn Griffin is in federal custody in Lombok, California, serving time for operating a meth lab. This man had basically been in and out of prison his entire adult life. So investigators get a copy of Griffin's probation record so they can get a sense of who he was and all the different places that he had been living. Like, he would get out of prison and move to one place and then get imprisoned there, get out and move around. And this led detectives to his parents' house, who live in Brigham City, which is very close to Brigham City. So they go out to talk to his parents, and they just say, "We want to know everything that we can about your son." So the mother says, we had a lot of problems with him. As he grew up, he started harming animals and then stealing. Police asked if they could see some photos of Glenn from 1984, and they wanted to take these to compare him to the sketch they had, and these photos were an exact match. So police really feel like they have their guy. This is definitely the guy who handled the money. But they just don't believe he could have done it alone. So they ask his mother, who were his friends back in the 80s? And his mother says, well, he never went anywhere without his best friend, Wade Moan. These two had really gotten into drugs and then criminal activity together. And the mom explained the relationship, saying that her son was definitely the leader. He was the alpha, and Wade just kind of went along with whatever her son said. So police start to think, if anyone is going to turn on Glenn Griffin, it will be Wade Moan. They find out that just after Brad's murder, Wade up and moves to Spokane, Washington, and never returns. So police decide to go up to Spokane and try to track down Wade Moan. So they meet with Spokane police, and they are told that Wade Moan is a witness. Open investigation. So police decide this is perfect because they can ask Wade to come to the police station to discuss this other case and then actually talk about the Brad Berry murder. So Wade comes in to be interviewed, and they tell him, you're not here on this case. We actually need to talk to you about a murder that took place in Brigham City in 1984. And they say, you have got to be open and honest with us here. At first, he doesn't want to talk about it at all. And then they tell him that Glenn Griffin is about to be released from federal custody. He's getting out in less than a week. Investigators say the blood just drained from Wade's face, he just went stark white. And then works there. At this point, Brad was still alive, so when the students were there, Brad was still alive. But when police showed up 5 minutes later, he was dead. So then Glenn comes back into the gas station and ties Brad up in the back and tortures him and then kills him over change, like literally pennies. So police say to Wade, you know, a lot of this story sounds true. But here's the thing, Wade. We don't believe that Glenn could have done this on his own. And then he says, quote, I was the one that got his legs. I was trying to hold him down. End quote. So he says, I didn't kill him. All I did was tie him down. Glenn killed him. And once Glenn goes off, there's no way to stop him. And I'm just really, really scared of Glenn Griffin. The county attorney said that Glenn was being released on Monday. So investigators had to get this case wrapped up very quickly, or he would be released from custody and he would likely run, and it would be very difficult to find him. So then investigators go to interview Glenn Griffin, and they said immediately upon seeing this man, they noticed those dark, empty eyes that the students had described. He said he was familiar with this particular gas station, but he had never been in it. And then police tell him that they had gotten his DNA off a dollar bill that had been collected in regards to this crime. And he's like, well, you know, I was always cutting my hands at work. It's totally possible that it's my blood, and then the dollar just got mixed into circulation in that small town and ended up at the gas station. And then he completely refuses to answer any more questions that police hurl at him. Now, Amy Hugh knew this would be a difficult case to prosecute because, first of all, it was 30 years old, so they needed evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. They had Wade Mon as a witness, and they offered him immunity in the case if he would testify against Glenn Griffin. But he was so terrified that he refused that deal. They still had the hairs that were found around the crime scene, and as they were getting ready for trial, they had the opportunity to do mitochondrial DNA testing on these hairs. This was a brand new technology and had never been used in Utah courts before. So they're able to get these hairs and compare the DNA with Glenn Griffin's, and they get a match. So not only is his DNA on the dollar bill, but his hair was found at the crime scene. Now, the hair was found in the back room of the gas station, so this would be harder to explain. You know, like if I walked into a gas station and I was getting a drink or something and my hair was found in the main area, that's one thing. But this man said he had never been in this gas station, and then his DNA was found in the back room right next to the body, possibility of parole. Wade Mon was tried and found to be not guilty in his part in the crimes. The prosecutor said he was very disappointed with this outcome, but despite his acquittal, the guilty verdict of Glenn Griffin did make Brad's family feel like they could finally have some peace and that Brad Perry had justice served. So that was a cold case coming at you from my neck of the woods. The thing that is so crazy to me is how scared Wade Mon was of Glenn Griffin. He was offered immunity and still refused to testify. I can't help but wonder how many more cases would be solved if people were brave enough to come forward and testify against, scary individuals. But it's also a terrifying thought that there are people that are that crazy and scary that their friends are terrified of them, and they're just out walking among us because nobody dares testify. You know what I mean? Anyway, thank you guys so much. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for being a patron. This is my